Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. We're here today with special guest, Laura Burke, who's here to share with us her new book, Red Flag Murder, a Jolene Mystery series. So when old secrets surface and warning signs are everywhere, how do you know what's real and what's a trap? Well, today's guest is going to share with us just that. Laura Burke has always been and will always be a storyteller. Since childhood, she dreamed of becoming an author, and now, with her stories in print, that dream has become a reality. Her passion for murder mysteries, began at the age of 8. This lifelong fascination led her to a career as a private investigator after spending 20 years as a nurse. In this role, she worked closely with police officers and detectives on several closed case files, achieving remarkable results. Laura currently resides in North Carolina and is currently working on the next novel in the Jolene series. So welcome to the show, Laura Burke.
Thank you, Marianne. I enjoy being here.
My goodness, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. What inspired you to write this?
Well, it kind of seems kind of strange. I like Westerns, and I was watching a Western one afternoon on the weekends, and this family came across some old covered up graves, and they had some old headstones that had been carved out by hand, I suppose, with a knife. And I thought, that would probably be a good book. Now, here's some old graves. Nobody probably remembers them even being here. And the headstones aren't really plain enough to read as to who they were or how they died or if they had any family left. And that developed into Red Flag Murders. And because I have done a lot of research for other countries on how they do crime scenes, I thought, now I can tie that into these unmarked graves because they were over 20 years old. One of the countries uses white poles and they put a red flag on it for a crime scene. And then they string out this tape to let people know you can't cross this because we're doing an investigation. And it just all fell together after that. There was no going back.
Well, you have interwoven such a phenomenal read. I'd love for you to share about the protagonist with us a little bit because I know she is such a dynamo.
uh, well, let's say, a lot of real estate people that own a lot of real estate, they're always looking for new real estate. This guy bought up all these acres of land, and he's got this huge idea of making it a huge grand slam hotel, plus a lot of $1 million homes, and he's going to develop it into this. So he buys it, he starts clearing the land, and that's when they uncover the first skeleton. The guys that are walking beside the bulldozer start yelling at him to stop, stop. He stops and he wonders, why am I stopping? I didn't hit a boulder or anything. And they start pointing to the ground, and there was this white pole with a red flag on it. So he comes down and he looks and he says, well, dig around and see if there was something buried there. Well, they do, and that's when they found the skeleton. Now, all production has stopped. They can't go any farther. They keep digging by hand a little bit farther down the road, a little bit farther down the line, and they keep uncovering more white poles with red flags and skeletons. But they'd have no clue as to who, what, or why these skeletons were buried there. So it's a question as to, was this maybe an old graveyard that somebody had put there and everybody forgot? Was this something that when people crossed the barren land in their covered wagons, this was a death toll by some kind of a virus and they buried these people? So they had to do a lot of digging They uncover 15 skulls and skeletons. And then the problem was they had to get a facial feature, so they have to call in another person to do a reconstruction of the face. And nobody knows who these people are or where they even came from. And that's where Jolene comes into the picture. And she has to solve what happened to these guys. There's no markings on the skeleton as to how they died. It's not a broken neck. They weren't shot. There's no lead found anywhere. They weren't stabbed, so there's no marking on the bone from a knife or a hatchet or anything of that nature. It's a real puzzle that she has to put together and solve. And that's where you get the red flag murders.
You did such a phenomenal job just bringing this kind of eerie atmosphere to the book. Can you share how you crafted this unsettling mood throughout the investigation?
Very carefully. Well, she has contacts, and one of her contacts, his name is Johnson, just like hers. He has this unique perspective on how to do a facial and head reconstruction out of mold. He molds the type of facial features and the head, and then he puts a wig on it, and you can tell exactly who this person was. So after he does his part, she moves the whole skeleton over to another friend of hers who is a doctor and an anthropologist, and she puts all the bones back together so that you know how tall this person was, whether they were male or female. And then after they take a picture of the head, they run it through all of the necessary FBI, missing persons, all of these places where people have turned up, where they were lost. And she finds out who they are. When she finds out who they are, then she can go to wherever they were from to find out when they left their home and how come they were at this area. And I can't tell you anymore because then that would ruin the story.
Well, who don't want to do that? It's interesting because if you look at this from like a cold case perspective, I mean, the developer faces both this like legal and moral dilemmas as he's uncovering these bodies. So, how
Mhm.
did you develop this character, and what challenges did he face that you can share with us that aren't spoilers?
Well,
That
the challenges were that the county sheriff. I'm not saying he was a bad guy, but you know he's trying to push this off on, oh, well, this was such a long time ago. It was probably some virus that hit, and these settlers they all died, and to keep them from infecting the rest of the town, they just buried them in a line. And the people in this small town, not being really educated, they took him for what his word was. And they said, well, that was a good idea. That way we didn't get sick and die too. But Jolene's not satisfied with that type of an answer. There had to be some reason that these 15 skeletons showed up. And it wasn't like they all died at the same time. There was a year or two in between their deaths. And that's one of the important parts of figuring out who these guys were. And that's where the doctors come in. They have to determine, okay, this guy was 35. He died 15 years ago. How old is he now? Did he have any family? The DNA, does it match anybody that was missing at that time? Does he have any family that the DNA matches? And those kind of clues are what helps develop who these gentlemen or females were so that they can find out exactly what they were doing in that area at the time of their death. And the legal aspects, because of the sheriff getting involved, he wants to block it. He didn't want them to mess up these things, get pouring more dirt on it and let the guy go ahead with his development, because it's going to be huge for the area. It's going to cause jobs. We're going to have a great casino here, a grand hotel, $1 million homes. Nobody will ever know that these things are here. And that was his attitude. And Jolene kept fighting him on it. And luckily, he didn't throw her in jail for interrupting what he thought was going to be his way out of having to deal with these murders. You see it more and more in smaller towns. And when you watch television, which I'm sure you do, some of it's portrayed in some of the movies. The old sheriff, he sits back in his chair with his feet up on the desk and smoking a big cigar. He could care less who run over Joe's dog outside or who shot a shotgun off in the local cafe. It's and I'm not taking anything away from them. It's just that they're laid back. They don't want any ruffles to ruin their small town atmosphere.
You hear that a lot when development comes in.
Yeah, exactly. And with this story, with all of this development that's planning on coming in, he would be the bigwig. And he wouldn't have to worry about anything, because the guy that owns all of this is going to bring in his own security and make his own deputies and his own sheriff, so that the sheriff of the town, all he's got to do is just walk around and look big.
How did Jolene do during this murder? I mean, I'm sure she faced quite a bit.
Yeah, and her two partners in the FBI, they kept her going. There was a lot of times that, they wanted to throw up their hands, and she would say, no, 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 we're not going to do that. There's got to be a reason. There has to be something that we haven't found. And Jolene is one of these that at home, she has this big blackboard, and we used to see him in school. And I know you're not as old as me, so you don't know what I'm talking about.
I do, actually.
Okay. Um, it was a big blackboard, and it stood on a stand. And Jolene, she makes columns out of it, and she puts on there the different clues and the different dates. She keeps going back to this blackboard, but it's at home. It's not with her, and she hates using a computer because it just doesn't have the room. So out of the school, an old school that was there, they found an old blackboard for her to start putting her notes on. And she's staring at this blackboard, and she says, I know there's something missing. There's got to be something missing off of this board. And they go over every column, every row, every word until she hits bingo. And that bingo led her to finding what was happening to these people and how these people were killed. And it wasn't a virus at all. It was pure murder. And that's when everything started falling together for her. And the sheriff didn't like that. He even tried to threaten her. He tried sending a couple of guys to shoot out the hotel window where she was staying, just to scare her off so that she would leave town, because she was a female. She didn't have any business there, according to him. But that just made her even more excited about trying to find out what was going on and why.
How would you say that this particular case challenged Jolene?
Most of the time, when she would find a cold case that she was going to work with her two buddies, it had most everything in the file. It had how they were murdered, how they were dressed, what their ages were, what their family members thought. It had witness reports. There wasn't any of this to go along with these murders. There was no evidence of how they were murdered. There was no evidence of where they came from. There was no identification, and there was no file on them. It was like, somebody snapped their finger and there was a skeleton. And that really perturbed her, because she always had something, even a little bit to go on. And with these, there was nothing at all to go on. And she had to basically start from scratch, sifting the dirt to find little clues, little pieces of maybe a watch or a ring or a button from clothing would give her some type of a clue as to how old these skeletons were. Back certain times in different years, more or less, different types of buttons were used for clothing. Now, most people don't know that, but you have porcelain, you have gold, you have silver, you have tin, you even have bone type buttons. And certain years, one type of these buttons were used on all clothing. So, say 1900, most of the buttons were bone and tin. So, if you found a skeleton that had bone or tin, they came from somewhere around 1900 on their clothing. Now, today, on our clothing, most of them are plastic. So you know that in the 2000s, most of our buttons are 2000. So that murder happened in the 2000 range. Then you have to narrow it down. It was really hard for her because there was no file and there was nothing to clue her as to what happened. In today's world, when you pull up a file about a murder, it either tells you the body was found strangled, or the body was shot, or the body was stabbed. These had nothing, and there was no markings on the bones to show that there was a stabbing. The neck was intact, it hadn't been broken. So, okay, what killed him? Poison? There was nothing in the DNA in the bone marrow to show it was poison. And most people don't know this, but DNA lasts for over 200 years. So when they took the bone marrow to test it to see if it was poison, there was nothing there. It was just straight DNA. There were so many things that she had to go back and train herself to look for, to be able to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. And that's what she had to do. And they had to sift all of the ground wherever one of these skeletons were found for different articles, for a ring or an old watch or a chain, cufflinks, anything that would give her a time frame of when the skeleton was buried and what time period that they probably died in. And that was very time consuming. Her blackboard was completely full from the front to the back and up the sides and down the middle.
She was working that case. Well, and it has me kind of thinking too. I mean, my goodness, you have such a phenomenal background. You bring so much experience and life experience to your writings. Was there anything that you had to research for this book?
Only the flags and the tape. Uh, like I said, certain countries use a certain type of lettering, a different color. Lower England uses a red tape of white lettering, and sometimes they use white tape with red lettering reversed. So it's a red tape with white lettering with red. Eastern part of England, they use blue lettering on a white tape. And if it's a murder case, it's the opposite. So I had to research, okay, if I'm using a red flag on a white pole and I've got this plastic tape that's going across to state this is a murder scene, don't barge into it, then somebody had to have been from overseas. Now, where did they come from? And how did they get that tape to do this with? And now that the tape has been basically plastic doesn't destroy in the elements, the tape could have been 100 years old. Or there had to be somebody in one of the nearby towns that printed this tape for them. It's all plastic. And she found the print shop that this guy's grandfather did the tape for him. And it was supposed to be for Halloween. So it wasn't even supposed to be used for a gravesite. This was a Halloween prank that was being pulled. That was one of the main things that I had to research was, okay, this is a red flag. The tape is going to be white with red lettering. Now, what country would this come from? And who would have used it? And how would they have thought about using it? So, was the person that really buried them from that country? Or was he helping somebody that killed them to do this murder? And that's where it becomes very complicated because most of the time when you have a cold case, there's only one main character that does the killing, not two or three, unless it's a gang killing. And if it's a gang killing, then you come up with broken bones, multiple clues, but there was no clues for these, so it had to be a singular killer.
And the mystery continues. Oh my goodness. What do you want readers and our listeners to take away from this book?
That all of my Jolene series are just as good as this one and better. And all of them have rated 5 stars. And it's something that you can endow yourself in and just let yourself imagine the pictures that are coming out of this book. Called relaxation if you want, or just, taking and closing out the world and absorbing all of these little clues that I've just mentioned and trying to figure out, okay, who did it? Who killed him? How did he kill him? And why did he kill him? That's something that I have always found when I read and I read a mystery. I always love trying to figure out who the killer was before I get to the end. 9 times out of 10, I can always figure it out by the middle of the book. But with mine, you can never know until you get to the very end of the book as to who it was and why they did it. So this gives you a thought, okay, I got to read the next chapter. Maybe I can figure it out by then. And then you get to that end and you say, okay, now the next chapter, I'll know who it is. I guarantee. And you get to the end of that one and you say, darn it, I thought I had it, but it's not them.
Oh my, that's one of the things I really love about your books. Even though it's a Jolene Mystery series, part of the series, it really can be a standalone book. So you can read it without having to read all the other books in front because
Correct.
of how you have this structured. It's such a great read. I mean, once I pick these up, I cannot put them down until I get to the end. And you're right. Can't figure out who is the person that really is the key suspect until you get to the end.
And that's why I'm writing these like I do, is because, like you said, you don't. It's not linked. If you read the second one, you don't have to read the first one to get into the second one. Each one is its own story. So you can start at book 7 and then go back to book 1, or read book 5 and then go back to book 2. And everyone is different, but it has the same main characters, and that's who you're following. You're following Jolene and her two FBI agent friends that are working with her.
Well, Laura, your books are just phenomenal reads. They are just great page turners. Where can our listeners go to connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
Yes, website is Laura Burke, mysterywriter.com. And all of my books are listed on there. The Jolene series is on there. Maison series is there. I have 18 books on the market. And all of them are basically mysteries. A friend of mine wanted me to write a love story, which I'm not into writing love stories, but I did write a small love story, which is Love on the High Seas. And everybody liked it, but they said it should have been bigger. And I said, look, you're lucky I wrote that one. I wrote a small children's book, which is also a coloring book. And I'm thinking about writing another one, but I haven't made up my mind. I'm so wrapped up with Jolene right now. That's the only thing I can think of.
Well, we can't wait to see what Jolene does next. Laura, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Oh, you're very welcome, Marianne. And it's always a pleasure to do an interview with you. And keep reading. I really like the fact that you like my books. And hopefully, since you like my books, your readers will like my books too.
Well, thank you, Laura. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new novel, Red Flag Murder, a Jolene Mystery series. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.